Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Anxiety Chicks podcast. I'm Allison Sepanera.
And oh my gosh. And I'm Taylor.
Do you have a frog in your throat, Taylor? I said you have a frog in your throat. What's
Yeah,
going
no,
on?
literally that's how I felt. I was like, "Oh my gosh, okay."
This is
My
how the show
allergies have
goes.
been horrible. So like everything's just like draining down the throat.
Well, I hope you feel better. I'm so sorry that that's happening. I know a lot of people are sick, but we are here today. And hopefully, if you're feeling under the weather, maybe you're binging our podcast. We have a lot of episodes for you. Today is going to be an episode near and dear to my heart, specifically because, as you all know, I am no spring chicken anymore. And yeah, I just turned 44 and I have talked about my journey with, just evolving as a woman in my 40s and perimenopause and going to different doctors and my mental health and physical health through that whole journey. And I'm so excited to welcome Kerri Axelrod to today's show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you guys.
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about Kerri and the reason why we wanted to have her on here. You guys will understand once I read her bio because she is an expert in this. So, Kerri Axelrod is a functional medicine dietitian and founder of Kerri Axelrod Wellness. She specializes in gut health, hormonal balance, and mental well being using an integrative approach to help clients heal without restrictive diets. She's the creator of Revive, which Kerri helps people eliminate bloating, fatigue, and anxiety for good. I'd love to hear more about that later. With an advanced training in functional medicine, yoga, and stress management, Kerri has been featured in Prevention Magazine, Real, Simple, and more. Before nutrition, she worked in political communications representing President Obama, and the DNC. That's amazing. Maybe a little more about that too. So, Kerri, welcome so much to the Anxiety Chicks. I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of what brought you to this type of topic and the specialty of perimenopause and what you've been seeing, I guess, in your practice of what's been going on with women's health.
Yeah. So I would say that in my own life, I've had sort of two really pivotal health moments that have really changed the trajectory of my own health and my career. Health and nutrition really was never something that I envisioned myself going into. It was never really an interest of mine growing up. I maybe you can relate or your listeners can relate, really grew up as like a product of the 90s and the early 2000s in terms of diet culture and fad diets. I remember very vividly going on the cabbage soup diet with my mom, like as a freshman or sophomore in high school. And so I really wanted nothing to do with fitness. I wanted nothing to do with nutrition because I really associated both of those things with restriction and, really trying to like push through. And so from a very young age, I was someone that just knew what they wanted to do with their life. And so at 12 years old, I was like, I'm going to school in DC and I'm going to work in politics. I was just one of those kids that knew. And, kind of fast forward a few years, my story in DC was very similar to a lot of people's, where if you have some talent, you're a hard worker and you meet the right people at the right time, your career can really take off. And that's what happened. And mine did. And I was working sort of my dream job with the DNC. I was a communications director in Pennsylvania, and there was a lot of opportunities in front of me. But in the background, I was getting really sick. And that I was dealing with debilitating panic attacks and anxiety and fatigue and dizziness, weight gain, digestive issues. And again, I knew nothing about, nutrition or functional medicine at this time. And so like anyone, you'd go to the doctors and you know, because I was trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And through this was over about a year, I would go to one doctor after the next. And really the only options that I was given were medications. And I'm not opposed to medications. Everyone has their own right to have a decision, but with each medication that I tried, maybe my panic attacks would get a little bit better, but my anxiety really didn't improve. My digestive issues didn't improve. The fatigue, the weight gain, the dizziness didn't improve. And, no one stopped to ask me what I was eating, which at that time was takeout because I wasn't cooking. I didn't have any time. No one asked me how my sleep was, which at that time was falling asleep with my laptop in my bed with my phone underneath my pillow for a few hours. No one asked me if I was taking any time off from work, if I had any hobbies, if I was like having fun. All of those answers were no. And so this went on for about a year and a half. And, I just remember one day like calling my mom and having this gut feeling that I was like, if I don't figure this out for myself, no one's going to figure it out for me. And I ended up quitting my job, which I don't always recommend to people, but that was part of my story. And the first training I enrolled in, this was 13 years ago, was actually just so I could learn more about nutrition and get better so I could go back to my life in DC. And sort of spoiler alert, 13 years later and a lot of schooling and training, I never went back to my life in politics and now run a private practice helping women overcome, digestive issues, better managing their anxiety, and now perimenopause hormone symptoms.
Well, I mean, just thinking about the trajectory of how you got to where you do, that is such a interesting story. And I think one that a lot of people can relate to that maybe are now either advocating for themselves or other people, myself included, as it pertains to mental health and
Hmm.
integrative medicine and holistic healing, so to speak. I think there's so many people that get started in this type of work because of personal experiences, and
Hmm.
things that they've gone through. And I'm so curious to hear kind of, we'll get into this, what the most surprising thing was as you went through this journey to learn about the medical system in our country, in the US, and integrative medicine, and how important it is to kind of seek out integrative medicine for yourself, because that's what I found that, same thing 15, 20 years ago. I didn't even know what integrative medicine was. I went to my doctor for every single thing, or a doctor, and they really didn't have many answers. Um, so what would you say kind of led you to integrative medicine versus, just I guess the traditional Western medicine?
Here, wait. Before
Yeah.
that question, like, okay, being a dietitian, that's another thing. When
Hmm.
you become a dietitian, I'm a dietitian too. It's not like, it's not what people think it is. Like, you get into it and you get so excited to help people. And then you're really in it and you're like, I'm not helping anybody. So I'm very curious on one, you became a dietitian, I'm assuming later on in life. And then two, you became a dietitian. Did that also make you go, what the heck? And then you got into integrative? Because we learn nothing about functional nutrition. You literally have to take that upon yourself. So I'm very curious about that. And then wrapping into
Interesting.
Allison's question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that that's a great question because certainly my career trajectory is not traditional. And even
Yeah.
within kind of the dietitian realm of dietitians that focus on functional and integrative care, my trajectory is not normal, and typical at all. And that I actually started the holistic, integrative, and functional training before I became a dietitian. And so I actually went back and sort of in reverse and then went through traditional schooling to become a dietitian. And there's some pluses and minuses there, but, at the end of the day, what I really felt like I was missing just from the integrative and functional care that I had received myself and the trainings I had done is that really strong foundational science background that you do get as a dietitian. And so that's actually what made me take the leap to go back to school to become a dietitian as I was doing all of this functional medicine and functional nutrition training. So there was a lot of frustrations there, of
Oh,
course,
yeah.
of
Oh my gosh. Your clinical rotation, you're just like, am I here to chart? Like, am I here to literally chart?
yeah,
Because we don't care about patients. Like, oh, I could go on a rant and I'm sure you could too, but it's like, I'm not helping anybody being here. Like, I'm literally sitting behind a computer, spending 5 minutes with a patient, and we're making no changes. And I'm feeding this heart patient just no salt. Like, that's what we're educating them on? Like, come on.
yeah. So I think to kind of also answer Allison's question, it's like, I always say when you're like willing to, there's always a creative solution for any problem as long as you want to solve the problem. And I think that that's how I've always sort of approached my own health and also how I approached my training and schooling. And so because I had all of this functional training, holistic and integrative training in school, I actually got to do a lot of my clinical hours in functional medicine. and doing a lot of my, sort of dietetic internship training and supervision at a functional medicine center, and it was one of the best. And so that's how I've always kind of approached life. It's how I've approached my own care. It's how I approach my care with, my clients and my patients, and it's how I've approached my own schooling as well. And so, 13 years ago, when no one really knew what integrative medicine was or functional medicine was, I was just like, I just had this gut feeling. And that's why I always really kind of try and instill in people, if like, if you have a gut feeling, it's like, your body best. And I just had a gut feeling that there was another solution, and I didn't know what it was, but I was willing to figure it out. And so I remember going to this center. I actually had moved back to Boston to go, and I'm from outside of Boston. And it was this center that was pretty advanced at this time, and it's more common now, but it had a lot of MDs that were practicing more integrative care. And that was kind of the start of that journey for me.
So, okay. So integrative medicine it sounds like has pretty much always been on your radar. Like you've wanted to learn more and more about that. You wanted to get more
Well,
training on
I guess
integrative medicine.
my question is, did you ever, going into integrative medicine, get an answer onto your symptoms, or was it literally just anxiety and stress?
Yeah. So through the years, definitely had different diagnoses. So, the main thing that was contributing to a lot of my symptoms was Hashimoto's. I had,
Yep.
exceptionally high TPO antibodies, and then, sub,
Dang it, girl.
sub
This is me.
subclinical hypothyroidism, and that was contributing to a lot of my symptoms. But one of the things that really sort of pushed me into nutrition is that even as I was going to different functional medicine doctors, even as I was going to different doctors in integrative medicine, really the only lifestyle solutions that I was getting were, at that time, the autoimmune paleo protocol diet. And I say that like I'm a dropout of that diet like 14 times over. And there was really no nutrition support that I was getting beyond like a really restrictive elimination diet. And there was no lifestyle support. And I was like, there's got to be more to this than just trying to take this Western medical model of medicine and putting it onto, this functional medicine model that was just like labs, supplements, elimination diet. And I'm a huge fan of supplements. I'm a huge fan of labs. They've been life-changing for me, and they're life-changing for clients. But even when I really didn't know anything, through my own experience, I was like, this formula of elimination diets, labs, and supplements only just isn't working. Like, I don't feel completely better. And so that was just kind of pushing me to learn more, work with clients, what's their experience, what needs to be changed. And that's kind of now,
Yes.
the approach that I take with clients.
That's the
I
thing,
love
is like
that.
we are so individualized. Like we are all so unique that it's this A plus B equals C when you go to a doctor, right? It's like, oh, you have this. So then we do this step. And that's like the medical system. It's like, oh, when we see this, we treat it with this, and that's how it works. But it's like, no, it's like this person's so different. And you got to look deeper into this person. What's going to work for them might not work for someone else. And that's why practitioners like you are so important. Unfortunately, not very accessible to most people, because it's like you're one in a million. Like, really, if you really think about it, most practitioners are not like you, wanting to actually care about a patient, look at them as a whole and as an individual, and really get to, okay, let's make your life, okay, you have Hashimoto's. Here's the elimination diet, right? Like that's what they do to people. The average person's going to go home, try it out, get more depressed, more anxious, probably put their TPO levels even higher and say, this just isn't working. I feel worse, give up, and live their life just miserable. Whereas it's like, how can I work with this patient? Like, let's dive deeper into you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that when I like just kind of shifting gears into this perimenopause discussion, because I somehow, through word of mouth, found more of an integrative, progressive gynecologist that she's basically like an integrative doctor gynecologist who now has like a year long waiting list. But I was going to the same gynecologist for over 25 years and loved her, like really loved her. She retired like 2 or 3 years ago. So I stayed in the practice. It was through a big hospital. I'm not going to name which one, in Philadelphia area, but we know that hospitals are taking over practices, right? Family, small practices don't really They're just not, they're like a dime a dozen now. So I just remember even starting to have the conversation with this new doctor I was seeing and talking about perimenopause. I was bringing it up. I was asking questions. She would shut me down in 2 seconds. I asked her about hormone levels and all this stuff, shut me down. No, you don't need it. What are you talking about? And actually didn't just shut me down saying, you know what? I think it's okay. Why don't we talk about that next time? She was actually so rude about it and just so dismissive. And I thought, are you kidding me? And then I thought to myself too, I feel grateful that I actually am someone who advocates for themselves, you know? So I knew that I was the last time I was going to see that woman. I was like, okay, bye. You know, whatever you think you're going to, you know, whatever you want to say, fine. So I found this other woman who has been so amazing. And really, she is such a long waiting list because there really aren't. And she has actually she's actually educated me and taught me a lot about what I'm sure you're going to give people information about. And I feel so grateful. But I never knew how many things were connected when it comes to perimenopause, especially with like gut health and with all the hormonal changes. So I would love to hear a little bit more about the connection between gut health and hormonal changes and why this is kind of really important to know during perimenopause.
Yeah. It's such a great topic to talk about. And I love the educational piece of being able to sort of share this. So we'll kind of start with, and you guys let me know if this is like common knowledge, but when we're kind of a typically cycling female in, you know, let's say our 20s and these our hormones, if we have healthy cycles, are pretty rhythmic and they're, you know, pretty predictable in that for, you know, the basis of simplification in the first half of our cycle, estrogen rises. And then about the middle of our cycle, it can vary a couple days. We have ovulation. And then in the second half of our cycle, estrogen really starts to decline. There's a little bit of a second bump, maybe around day 20. But in the second half of our cycle after ovulation, progesterone increases. And progesterone is really calming. It works on our GABA receptors. GABA is a neurotransmitter that helps reduce anxiety. Progesterone can help with sleep. And so this is a pretty sort of, if you have a healthy cycle, this is pretty rhythmic and sort of predictable. And then, you know, at the end of our cycle, both progesterone and estrogen drop. We get our period and the cycle sort of starts over again. So in perimenopause, that all starts to change. And you know, the average age of menopause in the US right now for women is about 52, you know, give or take a couple of years. And I think the latest stats I saw on this is that perimenopause can start anywhere between 10 to 15 years before menopause. And menopause is defined as 12 months without a period. And so you don't actually know that you went through menopause until you've sort of gone through it. So, you know, a lot of the clients that I'm dealing with, and I certainly dealt with this myself, like you turn 40 and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, there's a lot of changes that are happening. And I've never experienced this sleeplessness, increased anxiety, you know, pre-period mood changes, you know, just sort of, you know, cycles can become shorter, cramping, heavy periods can be a little bit more. And so I certainly saw this in my client population as well. And I was like, okay, we've got to get some more education around this. We have to kind of see what's going on. So around perimenopause, estrogen, I say, kind of can go on a roller coaster. So it went from this really sort of rhythmic, you know, predictable pattern to what you could imagine a roller coaster looks like, with really, you know, high peaks and strong valleys. And you can have estrogen excess and deficiency in one cycle in perimenopause. And so you can imagine sort of the mood fluctuations that happen as a result of that. And then as you start to age, naturally progesterone can start to decline as well. And progesterone is what really buffers the kind of harsher effects, side effects, or symptoms of estrogen. So when we don't have a lot of progesterone on board, we can start to get those symptoms that I just mentioned of perimenopause.
Sorry, I forgot my mic. I wanted to mute my mic so I could hear you better. Okay. So I just have a quick question because I did the gynecologist that I love now, she did recommend, okay, let me see what your hormones look like, right?
Yeah.
And I got a blood test done and she recommended that. She explained the best way she could to me, kind of like, you did a better job of kind of explaining that because it was a little still, I didn't understand, but she totally listened and answered all my questions. But I'm so curious about testing hormonal levels because isn't it true that sometimes, like, depending on where you are in your cycle, can't they fluctuate? So if I do my blood test on 1 month, my levels might look different 2 months later if I do the blood test at a different time, you know?
Yeah, you're right. And so I think to your point, that's why it's so important to be working with someone that's very knowledgeable and, really is an expert in this field. And because I do unfortunately have a lot of clients who, maybe just go to their PCP, and I have so much respect for doctors, and I know sometimes it makes it sound like I don't, but we're certainly not here to bash the medical system because I really believe there is a time and a place, but if they're lucky enough to get hormone labs, blood labs, they're just kind of sent at any time in their cycle. And we're like, well, where are these reference ranges? What are these reference ranges designed for? At what point in your cycle? So yes, it does matter what point in your cycle you're getting your hormones tested. I like to look at, depending on sort of whether we're looking at blood or we're looking at urine metabolites, typically 5 to 7 days after ovulation, if you know when you're ovulating and kind of can help sort of work with clients to make sure we know when they're ovulating. I like to look at estrone, estradiol, and progesterone about 5 to 7 days after ovulation. You can also look at estrogen in the first half of your cycle. But I will say that it is important to really work with someone that does know what they're, knows the symptoms to look at, because labs are always just a snapshot in time unless you're doing a lab that's like a series. And so if let's say estrogen is on that roller coaster and maybe we got it at a peak, but your symptoms don't match up with that, then it's important to kind of think about, okay, is this maybe an anomaly, and make a care plan accordingly.
Yeah. And she definitely sound like and even the thing that's great too about her is we do like 6 month checkups. So I just
Amazing.
saw her again and, she just sits with me for an hour and asked, really just wants to know how I'm doing. Cause she actually put me on something called spirulactin,
Mm-hmm.
which from what I know out of just a common person, it's kind of like a water pill or something. I'm not really sure what it does. I don't know if you can talk on
Yeah.
that more. Go ahead.
Spironolactone works more on androgens versus ovarian hormones.
So what's that mean?
So androgens you would think about as testosterone.
Yes. Okay. She did say I have very high testosterone.
Okay. That is what spironolactone, which help to try and bring down, is my best, based on the limited information, is usually typically what spironolactone is used
Yeah,
for.
that's what she and to be honest, it's really been helping. But of course, that's medicine. And I was like, you know what? I don't know what I think about this, but she was really just so patient with me. And she said, let's start really low, but also let's look at your lifestyle changes. And of course, that's also part of it. That's just one piece of the
Yeah.
toolkit for me, right? Is I'm gonna try this type of medicine. So of course we talk about gut health, right? And I'd love for you to speak a little bit on hormones like estrogen and progesterone and kind of during perimenopause, how does it affect the gut microbiome? And kind of do you have suggestions on how to work through that?
Yeah. That's a great question, because I realized you did ask me as part of that, and I got carried away with my education on what was happening with estrogen and progesterone. So yeah, there's also changes to the gut microbiome in perimenopause, and that can also affect mood and anxiety. And that as if estrogen is decreasing, or as estrogen decreases, it can decrease the diversity of the microbiome. And so a key marker of overall health is the diversity of our microbiome. We want a very, very diverse microbiome. And so how that can then affect mood. And there are other ways estrogen and progesterone can affect the gut. And I'll kind of come back to that. And so the way in which a lower diversity of the gut microbiome can affect anxiety in particular is typically through something called short chain fatty acids. And I always say that short chain fatty acids are like the unsung hero of gut health. And like no one's talking about them, but they're probably one of the most important things when it comes to your gut health and also your mood. That short chain fatty acids are what our gut bacteria create as a ferment on fibers that we eat. So you can think about fibers from the fruits and the vegetables that we're eating, or certain bacteria can ferment on these fibers and create something called short chain fatty acids. So there's research that shows us that these short chain fatty acids can then cross the blood-brain barrier and help modulate neurotransmitters in the brain and help reduce inflammation in the brain. And certainly there's more and more research showing us that, inflammation in the brain is associated with different sort of states of mental health. And so that is one way in which the decline in estrogen in particular can affect the gut microbiome and then our mood. And then as estrogen and progesterone decrease, it can also contribute to intestinal permeability. And so when we get intestinal permeability, that can create an immune response that can lead to a lot of new onset skin stuff, a lot of new onset food sensitivity, a lot of new uh, um, a lot of sort of inflammation, new inflammation in the body as well.
Anyone that's listening to this and not watching me on YouTube, I'm shaking my head so much when you talked about, you said like skin problems, because and a lot of those other symptoms you said, because I'm 44 now, and honestly it was like 2 years ago. I don't remember the exact day, but I definitely know it was like I was 42 and something happened with my skin. I thought it was an allergy. I've always had struggle with rosacea the last like 15, 20 years. So I've always had sensitive skin. But oh my gosh, like under my eyes, I honestly thought it was an allergy. And I mean, maybe it is. I don't know if allergies are, if you get new allergies when you go through this too. I mean, maybe, but it took me a long time. I went to dermatologists. I went to like these med spas. I talked to different experts about skin. And I know that so much about the skin has to do with the gut, right? And inflammation. So I honestly, it was my gynecologist again who kind of helped me. And I've been learning just on my own how important it is for my skin and what to use on my skin and what to put into my body and what to eat and how much it changes. And also, I've cut down on alcohol because that I learned so much about too with
Yeah.
skin, and also just that's not good for other things. But yeah, when you said that, I could definitely relate.
I'm like, I
It's
wonder what your stool test would look like. That's like the first place my brain goes.
so do you know that I've had like gastrointestinal issues for so much of my life and no doctor's ever asked me for a stool test? So I don't even know, like, would I just ask my primary doctor? Would I ask my GI doctor? Who would I ask to do that for me?
Yeah, it depends, like always. So, the way that I think about the medical system, based on my own experience, my training, clients, is like, right, the medical system excels when you've got a really acute situation happening. But where we really fail is with chronic conditions, with these low grade things that are ongoing for years and years at a time that really are starting to like affect our day to day life. And that was certainly my story for so long too. It's like they didn't really have a lot of answers for me besides like take some medication to suppress your symptoms. And so, a lot of times the stool test you'll get from your PCP or your gastroenterologist won't necessarily be exactly what we're looking for in terms of they're going to rule out like the big parasites, right? Which is good. I always say that like when someone's like, well, I did go to my gastroenterologist or I went to my PCP and I got, abdominal x-ray and endoscopy and a colonoscopy. And they said all of those things are normal. And I'm like, some people are like kind of bashing on that. I'm like, great. I'm like, that means you're at the 40-yard line and we can take you further because if you don't have that ruled out, sometimes I do have to refer you back out to them to kind of get those labs. So when someone has those, I'm like, great, now we can get to work and we can sort of get you, to a place where we can dig deeper and actually find out what's contributing to your symptoms. So the stool test that I like to use is a little bit of a different technology than you would get from your PCP or your gastroenterologist. And it's a little bit nerdy, but it looks at qPCR. So it's actually looking at the DNA of different organisms in the gut. So we can look at those parasites. We can look to see if there's any bacteria that we don't want to see that's overgrown. We can look to see what your beneficial bacteria looks like. We can look to see like, how are you actually digesting your food? Are you making enough enzymes to break down your food? What does your immune system in your gut look like? Are you digesting fat well, et cetera? So all of the things that are so important to you actually living that optimal life.
What's the name of that test called?
So there are a number of different stool tests that
Uh,
are available, but in practice, I personally use a GI map.
GI map.
Yeah,
The Genova
that is
Okay.
diagnostic solutions.
diagnosis. Okay.
Yeah.
So GI map. I mean, I only asked that because I don't know why no one has suggested that to me in the last 20 years of my life. So I know I'm going to be the one asking my GI doctor about it. And
Yeah.
I want to say, can I get a GI map or hear what he or she like has to suggest? But I want to do that.
Yeah.
Your best bet is going to be finding someone in functional. I thought you have a functional doctor you went to.
I did. It was years ago and it was okay. It
Yeah.
was okay. It was okay. I need someone younger, I think, and newer, progressive. Yeah.
Yeah. You may actually have better luck, like Taylor said, looking in the functional space because a GI doc may say, like, I don't run that lab.
Mm,
B, more importantly, if they're like, sure, I'll order it, like, do you really want someone that's not well trained in a lab reading your lab?
okay.
That's kind of, what I say. It's like when someone comes to me with a lab that I've never seen before, I'm like, you don't want me looking at this lab. Like I'm not trained to give you advice on this lab. And so unless they're kind of well trained, and I'm not saying that you can't find a GI doc that's trained in it. You might be able to, but you want to make sure that they're really well versed and,
Okay.
actually being able to help you.
I feel like it's also like, doctors and even GI doctors are trained in the labs that they're taught because it's not covered by insurance, unfortunately. Like it's a prevention lab more so. So for me, I've asked a GI doctor about it, and they just kind of said, "Hey, this is what we run. We don't really do that." And like she said, you really want someone in an integrative mindset because they're looking at the very detailed things, not just seeing if you're like optimal and like have no
Yeah.
big parasites. Because they're looking at let's get to the detail of like how diverse your microbiome is. If you talk about that to a GI doctor, they're like, oh gosh, we've got a Google searcher. But
Interesting.
it's true. It's like I've personally done a lot of these tests, and like it's crazy the information you get. Like you're just like, oh my gosh. Like you probably love the Dutch one because it follows your whole period. And so that's good for hormones, Allison, to ask about that one because it looks at everything. It looks at like even if you're like processing horrible estrogen in your body, which is like, okay, why do all these women have breast cancer? Why is all that, like we're looking into like, oh, because you're storing all this bad estrogen in your body and just stuff like that. I remember mine had like, the beta glucanidase or
Yeah.
whatever.
Beta glucuron days.
I had such a high percentage of it. I was like, my word. And I was like 22 years old when I got that done. It's like, ooh, that's very terrifying.
Yeah. Well, if anyone listening knows of a good functional medicine doctor in the Philadelphia area, Montgomery County, or whatever, I don't care. I'll drive. Just, I don't know, DM me on Instagram or something.
Kerri, maybe you agree with this. I think if you have gone to the doctor, you've gone to multiple doctors, you keep asking for answers, and you're just like so frustrated. If anybody listening to this is at that point right now, after this podcast, find somebody who specializes in exactly what you're feeling and talking about, and really just add in like functional or integrative into the Google search in your area, or even online. Like a lot of these practitioners, do you use your license or can you do all the states?
Yeah. So I work telehealth and I see clients all over the country. And so, but I think that that's why I think there's like kind of this catch 22, right? That in the functional space, I think sometimes labs can be overutilized, but then, in the conventional space, I think sometimes labs are really underutilized. And so I always say that labs are the basis that helps us really understand what's going on in your body. And then that gives us the understanding to really get to work with the diet changes, the lifestyle changes, the targeted supplementation, the nervous system support, blood sugar balance, mineral repletion. All of those things are the meat and potatoes of what can actually kind of rebalance the different markers that we're seeing on our labs. But that's why in all of my programs, I offer lab support, because I just see it almost being able to like just kind of skyrocket results. And I'm not oversimplifying the process by any means, but it really does give us this roadmap to be like, okay, these are the levers that we really do need to move to get you feeling better, especially when it comes to the gut in terms of bloating, digestion, loose stools, gas, just indigestion, etc. Really looking at a stool test to figure out what's going on in your gut. We can get some remarkable results, even when you've tried so many other things or been struggling with symptoms for decades.
So I'd love to hear a little more of what you suggest for women going through this type of perimenopausal, or I mean, we're all in menopause after what? Or we're all in perimenopause by the age of 40, right? You would say, or like we're starting it.
I would say that we'll all started at different points. It would depend on like the year that the time we go through menopause to kind of figure out when we're gonna start perimenopause. But a lot of, at least clients that I work with, are starting to really experience perimenopause symptoms in their early 40s.
So, like, how would I know? So, I think this is the biggest conundrum for me and all my girlfriends right now.
Yeah.
Okay, when we're like all just together, this is where the conversation goes now. And I just think it's so like any other type of healthcare concern you have about yourself,
Yes.
where, you know, you don't have a specific black or white symptom. They're like, this is what it means. But how do I know that like perimenopause is what's affecting me? Right. I mean, my sleep is another thing. 2 years ago, and my friends and I talk about this. I used to be the best sleeper. Now, oh my gosh, what the heck? But I mean, then there's life changes too, lifestyle changes, right? So sometimes I just get confused with, okay, well, I'm in perimenopause. I don't know. Sometimes it feels like sometimes I use that as an excuse, but I don't know if that's really what it could be for my moods too, like feeling depressed and, anxious a lot more and all of that. So I don't know. Is there an answer to that?
Yeah, I think it's going to look different for everyone, but I would say, if sleep issues are persisting despite making general lifestyle changes, like making sure that you shut down your electronics or you're sleeping in a dark room, etc., that you're trying to go to bed at a reasonable time. The sleep issues persist. And then over several months, you're really noticing changes that seem to be cyclical, right? That like, a couple weeks before your period, you're noticing that your mood is really fluctuating in ways that you've never experienced, or you're really experiencing PMS symptoms that are much more exaggerated or that you've never experienced before. Those all are kind of symptoms to me that would point to, okay, you need some support. Because while perimenopause and then menopause is a transition that all women will go through, it's not necessary to kind of suffer for 10 to 15 years before you go through menopause. That there are ways in which we can buffer your symptoms, and there are reasons in which your symptoms may be more exaggerated than someone else's. We didn't talk about the adrenal glands, but certainly the adrenal glands and your overall health of your adrenal glands play a role in that, the overall health of your microbiome, what your hormones kind of look like before that. So there are certainly ways that we can really help reduce symptoms as you move through that.
Okay. And so what would you say is like the first steps that someone can take if
Yes.
they're feeling like, especially with the gut, but especially with mood swings, since, we're talking about mental health a lot on this podcast, like what are some first steps women could
Yeah.
take?
So I always say that I have seen balancing your blood sugar make the biggest impact with clients and mental health and anxiety. And I think it is one of the things that gets grossly overlooked. And it's important for gut health. It's important for your adrenal health. It's important for perimenopause. It is important for anxiety outside of perimenopause. Like, you literally can't go wrong with learning the basics of how to balance your blood sugar. And so that's really where I would recommend starting, because imbalanced blood sugar is going to exacerbate hormone symptoms. It's going to exacerbate anxiety. It's going to exacerbate GI symptoms, everything. So that is one easy place where everyone can start. And so the biggest question I get is like, what's balancing your blood sugar? Like, how do I
Right. That's what I was just gonna ask.
Okay.
Yeah, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I always say that balancing your blood sugar is kind of like the Goldilocks effect. It's like not too much, but not too little. And that you want to make sure that you're eating about every 3 to 4 hours. So typically for my clients, that would look like eating within an hour and a half of waking, lunch, an afternoon snack, and then dinner. Typically, eating too close together and snacking all day can actually negatively impact the gut, and that it shuts down something called the migrating motor complex, which is the complex in our GI system that takes out the trash. And imagine if you weren't taking out the trash every week, things would really start to build up, right? So you don't want to be snacking all the time, but going way too long between meals actually drops your blood sugar. And then we've got this biological mechanism when our blood sugar drops too low, is that our stress hormones actually increase in order to get our blood sugar back up, because our brain runs on glucose. And so in order to get our blood sugar back up, we release adrenaline, we release cortisol. And guess what those stress hormones are also associated with? Anxiety, right? And so this effect of balancing our blood sugar can really make a huge difference. So balancing blood sugar meals every 3 to 4 hours, making sure you've got not just adequate protein on board, but adequate carbohydrates and fat. And so, I like to see women having about at least 100 grams of protein a day. So that usually breaks down about 30 grams of protein per meal and about 10 grams of protein as a snack. But you don't want to just overload with protein. You've also got to get a good amount of complex carbohydrates for your hormones and healthy fat. And so that's kind of the foundations that I talk about, is like, once we have those labs on board, it's like now we know the levers that we can really pull in order to get the most bang for your buck with the diet and lifestyle changes that you need to make.
It is really hard to eat that much protein. I mean, for
Most
me,
women undereat protein though. Like
Yeah.
you should even be eating close to 1 gram per body weight. So like
I
100
know,
is
that's what I
kind
read.
of
Yeah.
you can make it happen though. Like seriously, a lot it seems overwhelming, but if you really break it down, like she said, to 30 grams a meal, like getting 30 grams in a meal is really easy. You just have to like really think of like you have to like once you get into the routine of it, of knowing like this much equals 30 grams and you have that in your head, like that's where I started. Because looking back, I remember I was just vegan by like in college just by almost trend of it them saying it's healthy for you, right? And then I ended up getting a lot of this blood work and labs done, and I found out I was so deficient in almost every amino acid, which amino acid that you have to consume to have in your body. Your body can't create it. So it wasn't the essential amino acids. And when I figured that out, it was like I was deficient in tryptophan too, which tryptophan is your precursor for serotonin. So it was this whole awakening to me, and I remember I started really incorporating a lot of protein in. And not only do you find yourself feeling just stronger, better, you aren't as moody because your blood sugar is more stabilized and you're not craving that sweet treat all day or that snack in between things. You're just like way more balanced. It's like a normal rise and a normal fall, a normal rise and a normal fall, because that protein is so satiating to your body.
Yeah. I agree.
I will tell you, I
So
will tell
many
you
women undereat
one other
protein.
thing that's like totally shifted for me. And I've heard from a lot of like the women that I'm around my age. I basically walk so much. Like I try and get 10,000 steps every day. I don't ever do any kind of high impact cardio anymore, but I do a lot of strength training and
Yeah.
I do like bar class. And I feel myself getting really strong, even doing that 2 to 3 times a week. And then I also do yoga, but I literally can't tell you the last time I did like some like really high impact step class or something. And that's just me. I know there's people that still love doing that, or they're runners or something and it's therapeutic for them. For me, I think it was putting my body in this like stress state when I was trying to still do like how I used to do that when I was 25. I was literally trying to do the same thing and it was not working. And honestly, I look and feel better than I did 10 years ago by changing that. So does that have, I don't know, is that anything?
Yeah. I mean, I think I always say, like, we know the science, but also it's like, how do you feel when you make a change? And if you're like, I look and feel better, I mean, do we need more? Do we need a randomized control trial to
Right.
like confirm that you're like, I feel better, I look better? Like, Awesome. I mean, I will say that, that the sort of chronic cardio, especially as we age, like isn't serving us. Like we need to be picking up heavy weights, especially
Yes.
to build bone density, to build muscle, right? Like we, and I say we because I'm in.
It's decreasing at 30. Your bone density starts decreasing at 30.
Yeah, and like I don't know about you guys, but I now have the knowledge of watching my grandmother age and break a hip and seeing
Mm-hmm.
how frail she was and how that was, the decline of her health overall. And so I think we have this place of a lived experience that we can actually make different changes. But I will say that especially in later stages of perimenopause and menopause, the quick bursts of cardio, the like sprints or the hit in like very shorter, compact timing tends to be really good for cardiac health and
Mm-hmm.
metabolic health. So it is really important to get those steps in. It is really important to lift those heavy weights. It is really important to work on that nervous system health with meditation and yoga, etc. So all of those things that you are doing is really great, but it does appear right now based on the literature that we have that some of those like really shorter quick bursts of energy, not those hour long, step classes that, we
Yeah.
kind of all did, but, like a 15-minute sprint or something along those
Yeah.
lines, one or two
The
times a
HIIT
week
exercises.
can be
Interesting.
Well, because I
beneficial.
think there's also studies that I think show your cholesterol starts to increase as you age. And so, with that, those more HIIT workouts, I think the science is showing that to decrease that bad LDL, they're seeing the HIIT workouts actually correlate with that. So, a lot of women start to see their cholesterol go up and then say, but like, I think it's where you're overdo things. So, it's like people who do the step class 6 days a week. It's like, okay, I'm going to do Tuesday, Thursday bar. I'm going to lift heavy weights Monday, Saturday, and then I'm going to throw in like one or two HIIT workouts, right? So it's like, I think it's when we get into those extremes with anything, we fail.
Yeah. I would also say it's like, what are the health of your adrenal glands and what is the state of your overall stress load in terms of determining the exercises that you're doing? Because exercise is a stress on the body. It's a good stress, but you've got to be in a place where you can handle that stress. And if you're not, then you may have to kind of take the intensity of workouts down a notch as you kind of rebuild the stress resiliency and kind of take care of what's going on in the body that's putting that extra stress load on you. So then you're able to kind of handle that the stress load of more intense exercise
Yeah.
in the future.
Well, this has been so wonderful and gosh, so informative. I know there's so many people listening right now that are very thankful that you're here and that we talked about this. I know already a handful of women that are going to want to listen to this that I know personally. But before we go, I'd love for you to, we usually, every week we do something called a healing tip of the week. And I'll usually kind of just give our listeners a healing tip and what to take away from the episode. But I'd love for you to share if you have either a healing tip or like a piece of advice to anyone listening that can give them a little bit more insight into how to help themselves and their mental health during perimenopause or whatever you would want to offer.
Yeah. Well, I'll give it two because one is just reiterating the balancing your blood sugar and how impactful that can be. And we didn't talk about it a lot in this episode, but your circadian rhythm and the health of your adrenal glands is so important again for digestion, mental health, hormones, etc. And so one of the easiest ways that you can start that process is getting outside and looking at the sun, within the first hour of waking as well. So typically, it looks like in the literature, it's about 10 minutes on a sunny day, 20 minutes on a cloudy day. And so that is also another easy thing that we can do to start really improving our health.
I love it. Thank you so much. And I'd love for you to share where everyone can find you and connect with you and any kind of offerings that you have coming up.
Yeah. So my website is my name, kerriaxelrod.com. So that's KerriAxelrod.com. I'm Kerri at Kerri Axelrod on Instagram as well. And so you can work with me in two ways. I have, as you mentioned in the beginning, Revive, which is my group program designed to help you eliminate your constipation, your bloating, and fatigue, and better manage your anxiety without an elimination diet. The next round of Revive starts February 25, and it's currently open for early bird enrollment. And there's some great opportunities for you to get started right away if you're interested in that program. And then I do work one-on-one with women as well who want to understand the labs that they need to really better manage their anxiety, perimenopause symptoms, and digestion. And the application to work with me is on my website as well.
Amazing. And we'll put all of that in the show notes. So if anyone, just scroll down and you'll see all that good stuff. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Taylor. Do you have anything else you want to say
No,
or
that was
add? No.
great episode. Thanks for all the information.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And you guys, please rate, review, subscribe if you're on YouTube or if you're listening on streaming platforms. We're going to have so many more guests coming up, and take a break or two, maybe a week or two over the holidays. But thank you so much. And you guys, we will see you next week. Bye.